share a story I did last week at another storytelling show that I sort of run. And it's about belonging. Our theme was belonging. And how all of us really want to belong to certain groups and certain organizations. You know, how people enjoy belonging here who are members. And my story starts back in 1970-something. I'm 27 years old. I'm standing at the back of the Church Street Community Center. It's a long, thin bowling alley sort of a room with tables on the side, and it's filled with young Jewish kids who are there to laugh because it's the second night ever of Yuck Yuck's Comedy Cabaret. And I'm standing at the back of the room thinking, I'm going to be on in an hour and a half, and I don't know if I really belong here. And that whole sense of belonging started early for me because from as long as I can remember, I was referred to as a husky child, which of course is my family's definition for being ample. So not only was I husky, you might notice I have a brown mark at the side of my face. It's my birthmark. When I was younger, it was a lot larger. It went down to my chin. My face was smaller. So when I get to school, I feel like an outsider because people, my other classmates, sort of pick on me for my girth and my looks. And I remember one especially that really hurt me was a kid who went, "Hey, Nasimok, you got shit on your face." And I went home after that day, and I was upset. My mother was a very bright woman. And she told me that this was not just a birthmark, it's a beauty mark. And God gave it to you to make you special and different. And I bought it. So going back to school, I was an individual, and it didn't matter to me really that much that I wasn't part of the jocks, that I would be picked second last or last for softball, depending on the bat. It didn't matter to me that I wasn't part of the brainiacs, those kids in grade 3 who were accelerated while I was sort of held back and did a year at a time. But the group I really wanted to belong to were the kids into drama. Because when I was 8, I went to the O'Keefe Center for the first time to see Oliver with my dad. And I fell in love with the idea of performing and, more importantly, of being on the O'Keefe Center stage. I thought this might not happen, and I would not belong to the group of thespians because my public school career included playing a boy, a pirate, and policeman number 2. I never had a character had an actual name or more than 1 or 2 lines. But when I get to University of Toronto, things change. I get a role in something called the UC Follies. And this is a show that Wayne and Schuster were first discovered, and then years after that, Lauren Lipowitz made his name. You might not know him by his Lipowitz. He's lost the Lipowitz. He uses his middle name, and as she's whispering, it's Lauren Michaels, a person from Saturday Night Live. He started UC Follies. Unfortunately, the show was so bad, it closed during dress rehearsal. I had a little debate with the producer here, my friend Marty Goldberg, whether we actually made it to dress rehearsal. But I remember we did, because at the dress rehearsal, as I'm backstage getting ready to go, a man approaches me and asks me if I want to be a supernumerary for the Canadian Opera Company. An extra, those people on stage who add atmosphere, they don't sing, they just do menial tasks like moving tables and chairs and carrying out dead bodies. And I had done enough of that in my high school career. And also, I knew nothing about opera. My whole knowledge was based on Warner Brothers cartoons, you know, Kill the Wow. But the Canadian Opera Company performs on the O'Keefe Center stage. And in second year and third year, I spend more time at the O'Keefe than I do in school in September and October. 3 operas the first year, 4 operas the second year. When I graduate, by an odd set of circumstances, I get to go on tour with the Canadian Opera Company across North America for 2.5 years. 10 provinces and 38 states, 96 così fan tuttes, 54 love poems. But that's another story. I come back from that third tour and I move into a house on Beverly Street with 3 friends, Beverly and Queen. One of the guys in the house, John, is helping out at a show called 3 Cheers for Showbiz at the Beth Am Synagogue. None of you saw it. So anyways, I go up there to help with the lighting, and I become enamored of one of the dancers named Gail. But I'm not going to be the guy to approach her because I've just come off a sort of bad relationship, which When you're on tour with the opera company and you go out drinking with the people afterwards, you cut right to the chase. You don't talk about favorite pizza toppings. You talk about your hopes and your dreams and aspirations. And this young woman who I started to date, whom my mother thought was ideal because she was Jewish and a lawyer, she did not want to jump that quickly. So my heart was broken. I said, I will not pay any attention to this game. The cast party is held at our living room on Beverly Street. And I go to the living room, and all the cast and crew are sitting around, and there's Gail sitting next to the comic on the show. Even though I hadn't done comedy, I knew I was funny as hell. And I thought, okay, when I get my chance, I'm going to go out there, and I am going to show off and maybe entertain Gail. I did a routine that I made up at the spot, which I won't share with you. And Gail and I spent a beautiful summer together, and I thought, this is it, until she moved back to Atlanta, Georgia in the fall. And I got taken to something called Gene Taylor's Improv, which was the first real comedy club. Gene Taylor used to be a talk show host on City. And I go on and I do a routine about my trip to Acapulco. We go, slow down. The second time I go on again, I go, slow down. Third time I go on again, I kill. It's such a great feeling. I mean, all those laughs, it's like a drug. 3 days later, I go back into the same story, and I bomb. I bomb so badly, I am never going to do stand-up again. It hurt. And that lasted 4 months. I'm walking along Yonge Street up into Mark Breslin, who I went to high school. Mark says, I'm opening a new club once a week at the Church Street Community Center. I hear you do stand-up. Will you come and do a bit? I went, okay. And they said, I need a feature for the second week. Can you do 30 minutes? I went, sure. I'm not going to do how to put the puck in the net. So here I am standing at the back of the room, and it's time to go on. And Mark introduces me, and I go down. People are applauding. I don't know why. They don't know who I am. And I go, and I decided to do stories I've told some friends. One was called Being of the Jewish Persuasion, which is basically what I remembered about my breasts. I have evidence. And the second one I did was about, because of my proclivity to date a bunch of people, it was called How to Take Home a Gentile Girl, so you don't get thrown on the will or lose the condo in Florida. But the big story was about Debbie Wagman, my great grade 7 crush, and inviting to my bar mitzvah and dancing the bunny hop together and following her to Camp Rockwood to walk her home. And I finished a half hour. And it was great. And I went across the street with all these other young people who were starting out in comedy. And I finally found my tribe. I finally found where I belonged. And it was a great 3 or 4 years until Yuck Yucks got famous. We moved to a basement on Bay in Yorkville. The audience started to change. It was no longer composed of all Jewish people. It was like Mr. and Mrs. Saga and the Little Sagas. And I had to change my routine. And I didn't enjoy it. And then Howie Mandel and Jim Carrey show up. And then all we're doing is 8 minutes for television. And I decided to leave, and I stopped performing. 18 years ago, I'm doing something called the Siminovich Prize for Theater. And the son-in-law of Lou Siminovich hears my story, says, why aren't you performing? I went, I don't know. 2 days later, I get a note from the university formerly known as Ryerson about a course called Solo Theater. Learn to tell your story. And I go, is this Beshert? I sign up, I do a 10-minute story about the opera company, a 30-minute story, and then that turns into a one-person show I've taken across the country. And once again, I have found my tribe. And I have found the joy of telling stories, because I have an analogy of telling stories compared to stand-up when people ask me. For me, the difference between most stand-up, not all stand-up, and good storytelling is the difference between fast food and a gourmet meal. I love Mary Brown chicken. An hour later, forget it. But if you hear a story that inspires or moves you or makes you think, then it really is a gourmet meal, and I hope today you hear stories that will do that. Thank you.